The United Kingdom, once a global emblem of power, prestige, and wealth amassed through centuries of imperial domination and colonial rule, is now facing one of the worst economic and social crises in its modern history. From being the heart of a vast empire that spanned continents, the UK has transitioned into a nation grappling with a severe economic downturn, a result of both internal mismanagement and external shocks. Its current debt-to-GDP ratio stands at a staggering 99.5%, a stark contrast to other major economies such as Germany, 63.7%, and Ireland, 42.5%. This crippling debt load is symptomatic of broader systemic issues, compounded by a shrinking labor force and stagnating productivity. One of the most alarming aspects of this decline is the sharp reduction in the UK's workforce, driven primarily by long-term sickness and the chronic shortage of labour. Since the 2008 financial crisis, the UK's productivity has been largely stagnant, with no significant recovery in sight. Public services, particularly healthcare, are severely strained. Hospitals across the country are facing a critical shortage of staff, especially nurses, and waiting times in emergency rooms have reached unprecedented levels. As of 2024, 45% of patients wait for 4 hours or more to receive care in emergencies, reflecting a healthcare system in crisis. This labor shortage extends beyond healthcare. There is a massive shortfall of over 100,000 truck drivers, which has severely impacted the country's supply chains, resulting in delays in the delivery of essential goods and contributing to rising prices. The culmination of these issues has led to the sharpest rise in poverty seen in the UK in over 30 years. Inflation has soared to over 11%, the highest in 4 decades, and this has drastically affected the cost of living. Food insecurity is rampant, with an estimated 2 million people in the UK going without food for at least 1 day every month. The economic disparity between London and the rest of the country has become even more pronounced. Without London's financial contributions, the rest of the UK would be economically comparable to Mississippi, the poorest state in the United States. At the root of this economic collapse lies the decision to leave the European Union, Brexit. On June 23, 2016, the UK narrowly voted to exit the EU, a move that many believe would restore British sovereignty and lead to greater economic freedom. However, Brexit has had far-reaching negative consequences that were perhaps not fully understood or anticipated at the time of the referendum. Prior to leaving the EU, the UK enjoyed a highly beneficial trade relationship with its European neighbours. The EU accounted for 42% of UK exports and 48% of its imports as of 2022, making it the UK's largest trading partner. Brexit disrupted this delicate balance. By leaving the EU's customs union, the UK lost its ability to trade goods and services freely with EU member states. Tariffs and customs duties were imposed on UK exports to Europe, which diminished the UK's competitiveness in European markets. In an attempt to mitigate this disruption, the UK sought to negotiate free trade agreements, FTAs, with individual EU countries. However, this has proven far more challenging than anticipated, particularly because of the complexities involved in establishing new regulatory frameworks for goods and services. This disruption hit the UK's service sector particularly hard, which is problematic because the UK is a service-dominated economy. A staggering 81% of the UK's GDP comes from services, with financial and legal services forming the backbone of its economic output. However, unlike manufacturing, services are far more difficult to export and are highly susceptible to regulatory changes and economic shocks. The loss of seamless access to the EU market, compounded by the disruption of trade agreements, has severely affected the UK's service sector. As a result, businesses that once thrived on trade with European neighbours have struggled to adapt to the new reality of increased barriers and regulatory hurdles. Additionally, the UK's labour market has suffered immensely post-Brexit. One of the advantages of EU membership was the free movement of labour across member states. This allowed industries such as healthcare, hospitality, and logistics to recruit workers from across Europe. However, since Brexit, an estimated 200,000 EU citizens have left the UK, exacerbating labour shortages in critical sectors. As of 2024, the UK has over 89,000 unfilled vacancies in essential industries, leading to significant operational disruptions. For instance, the shortage of truck drivers has caused delays in the delivery of goods, while the lack of healthcare professionals, particularly nurses, has strained the already overstretched National Health Service, NHS. Another major issue compounding the UK's economic woes is the depreciation of the pound sterling, which has lost significant value since Brexit. The weakening of the currency has made imports more expensive, contributing to the inflationary spiral that is now crippling household budgets across the country. With inflation soaring, the cost of everyday goods and services has become unaffordable for many, pushing more families into poverty. The government's response to the crisis has been hampered by its own fiscal constraints. With such a high debt-to-GDP ratio, the government has little room to maneuver in terms of increasing public spending on health, welfare, and economic stimulus programs. The combination of labor shortages, inflation, stagnating productivity, and a service-dependent economy has plunged the UK into a vicious cycle of economic decline. The government's inability to invest in public services is leading to higher rates of long-term illness, which in turn is reducing workforce participation. Fewer people in the workforce means less consumer spending, which stifles economic growth. This creates a feedback loop in which the economy remains stagnant, and both the government and private sector struggle to generate the revenue necessary to break the cycle. The UK's current economic situation highlights several critical mistakes that have led to this downturn. Firstly, the decision to hold the Brexit referendum, a decision largely driven by populist sentiment, was not based on sound economic reasoning. The complex economic implications of leaving the EU were not fully understood by the public or adequately explained by political leaders. As a result, the country is now dealing with the fallout of a decision that was made without sufficient regard for its long-term economic impact. Secondly, the UK's over-reliance on its service sector has made its economy particularly vulnerable to global economic shocks. While the service sector is an important part of any modern economy, it cannot provide the same level of employment and economic resilience as a robust manufacturing sector. Manufacturing industries, which produce tangible goods, are easier to scale and are less vulnerable to disruptions in the global financial markets. The UK's lack of focus on revitalising its manufacturing sector has left it with fewer options to generate sustainable economic growth. Lastly, the UK's departure from the European Union has isolated it from one of the world's largest and most powerful trading blocs. The EU provided the UK with significant bargaining power in global trade negotiations, access to a vast market, and the free movement of labour. By exiting the EU, the UK has lost these advantages, and its attempts to establish new trade relationships have so far failed to replicate the benefits that EU membership once provided. In conclusion, the UK's current economic and social crisis is the result of a combination of poor political decisions, over-reliance on the service sector, and the unintended consequences of Brexit. The country's struggle to adapt to its new reality post-Brexit, coupled with external shocks like the COVID-19 pandemic and the Russia-Ukraine conflict, has left it in a precarious position. The lessons from the UK's decline serve as a stark reminder of the importance of sound economic policy, careful consideration of political decisions, and the need for a diversified economy to withstand global challenges.